What is up everyone, and welcome back to another video. So in Fortnite, W King is definitely one of the most popular strategies. By pushing into every fight you see, you're able to gather tons of elimination points, gain tons of valuable experience, and become a better fighter overall. Since W King is such a popular playstyle in pretty much all game modes, I figured that in today's video we'd go over how to W key like a pro in Fortnite Chapter 4. I'll be giving you guys all of my top tips in order to become a better fighter, get more kills, and overall just become a more successful W keyer. If you go on to enjoy this video, then be sure to drop a like on it, subscribe if you're new and want to see more content just like this in the future, and of course it would really mean a lot if you could use code Teckoh in the item shop. It's 100% free view and it seriously does help me out a bunch. As always, a massive thank you to everyone who uses my code. But with that said, and without further ado, let's get into today's video. So the first big key when it comes to W keying is knowing where to land. Now obviously, if you're W keying and you're trying to play an aggressive playstyle, you're going to want to not only get kills off spawn, but get some good loot. Since most of the time when you're W keying, losing early game fights isn't really a big concern of yours, you may want to opt for one of the more popular spots with a lot of loot. These might include places like Slappy Shores, Anvil Square, or Faulty Splits. These spots have a ton of loot, good materials, and plenty of players. So if you make it off spawn, you should end up with at least a handful of kills and with good loot and materials for your mid-game fights. Another option though, and one that I think a lot of players should start exploring, is the outskirts option. What I mean by the outskirts option is basically landing right outside of a POI, getting some decent loot and materials, and then rotating into the POI to clean up all the kills. The reason I like this strategy is because usually after cleaning up a few fights, players are going to be in pretty much shambles. Especially if you're able to catch fights in progress and third party them, you should be able to secure some easy kills and pretty much secure a POI worth of loot. The current map only has 9 named POIs at the time I'm making this video. Hopefully they add more soon, but it has much more small unnamed POIs. So definitely consider that strategy if you're trying to avoid dying from 50-50s off spawn, especially if you're playing like a tournament or arena or something. You may get like 1 or 2 less kills in early game, but you'll survive far more often and be much more comfortable in your fights. So overall, you can go for either option, but I definitely like the outskirts option a lot. On to our second tip for this video though, and this one is a much more brief tip, which is the importance of mobility. The way I like to think of it is whenever you're moving around on the map, you should try to have at least some form of mobility at all times. If you're W keying and you're trying to maximize the amount of kills you can get, you're going to need to move around quickly because most players simply aren't constantly moving around and looking for kills like you are. Basically what I'm saying is they're not coming to you, so you have to go to them. Having any form of mobility like a dirt bike, a car, a shockwave hammer, or even a boat can really help a lot when it comes to finding people to fight. I know it's a pretty simple tip, but a lot of people do seem to miss out on this. Moving on from that though, and the next big key when you're W keying is knowing where to find fights. So when it comes to finding the most fights, you'll tend to have the most success in areas near the edge of the zone, specifically on the side that people are rotating into. This is because if you look at the map on screen, for example, everyone from the POIs outside of zone are rotating into pretty much the same exact areas. So if you're looking for the most amount of fights, you're going to want to try and position yourself somewhere around those areas. On the other hand, if you were trying to play passive, which obviously you're not if you're W keying, but just for the sake of example, you would want to go to the opposite side of zone, also known as the dead side of zone. In the example I showed you on screen, the dead side of zone would basically be anywhere on the southern portion of that zone. Another key to finding a lot of players is to try and position yourself relatively close to major POIs. A lot of players have a tendency to go toward POIs since they often want to get more loot, materials, or find fights. And by staying at least within the vicinity of major POIs when you're moving around, you should be able to find way more fights and more third-party opportunities as well. So now that we've gone over where you should rotate to find the most fights, another big key is ending fights quickly. If you take a long time to end your fights, you're way more likely to get third-partied, have other people jump into the fight, and basically end up in a really bad situation. So being able to get into a fight and end it quickly is one of the most crucial skills you can have for W keying, and I'll be giving you guys a few tips to maximize your ability to do that. The first key to ending fights quickly is to constantly apply pressure. That pressure can be something like going for piece control plays, spraying your opponent constantly, or even just staying on their walls and making sure they're unable to heal. I'm sure you guys can all relate to this situation. Let's say you're in a fight, you get tagged, or even get your shield cracked. At this point, your goal is purely to get away so you can heal, but it seems like no matter what you do, they stay on you and they won't go away, and you end up dying. Your goal should be to replicate exactly what that opponent did. Maintain constant pressure throughout the fight to keep the other player on their heels, and get them into a defensive position where you can be the one that's aggressive. All in all, the person who plays the most aggressive tends to win fights in Fortnite. It's not even so much of a skill thing as it is a mentality and confidence thing. If your opponent's just getting pushed nonstop, they're going to get angry and they're going to get nervous, and it's going to be a really bad time for them. Now, of course, that doesn't mean if you're at 20 HP that you should be slapping on your opponent's wall and spraying them. You want to be reasonable and heal up when you need to, but you also should try to maintain at least some level of pressure whenever possible to clean up the fight. Another quick tip to end fights fast is probably one you didn't expect in this particular section, and that's to train your aim. I know it sounds a bit out of place in the ending fights quickly section, but hear me out. In so many fights, the initial damage comes down mostly to aim. Maybe you're going for a beam on someone who doesn't know you're there, maybe you're in a box fight and trying to hit a big shot, or maybe you're directly in someone's box in an aim duel. Whatever it may be, there's literally no situation in a fight where your aim does not matter, and aim is one of the biggest things that separates mid-tier fighters from pro-level fighters. If you're able able to hit your shots consistently for heavy damage, you'll find yourself not only getting the upper hand in far more fights, but also consistently winning in those situations where you're in a 50-50. So all in all, definitely take some time to practice your aim if you haven't been doing it. I know it's a bit boring, but it seriously does help you out a lot. On screen, I'll go ahead and put the codes for two of my favorite aim maps in Fortnite Creative, which are Raider 464's 1v1 aim trainer, as well as the Scavik aim trainer by Donwazi. Those maps can both help you with your aim from a variety of ranges and situations, so they're definitely worth using. I recommend that you try to aim train each time you get on for anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes, depending on your skill level and preference. Finally, guys, my last tip to end fights quickly is to get really good at piece control. Piece control is one of the simplest ways to end fights quickly. You get your opponent caught in your builds, they have nowhere to go, and it essentially comes down to you getting a good peek and cleaning up the easy kill. Piece control is a bit of an advanced skill to learn, and is something that mostly pros do, and it's especially difficult if you're not already pretty advanced mechanically, but it still is very valuable and something you should definitely focus on if you're trying to become a better W keyer. To practice piece control, I recommend using Raider 464's Piece Control Practice Map V3. This map features a ton of different piece control drills and basically allows you to practice all the motions of it in various situations. If you want to practice in that map, I'll go ahead and put the code up on screen right now. If you're completely unfamiliar with piece control, you may want to learn a bit more about it, in which case I'd recommend you check out my recent piece control guide, where I covered all the information you're going to need to know about it, and I went over various piece control techniques and practice methods. If you're not familiar with the concept of piece control, or you just want to get some more information about it, then definitely check out that video after this one, and it should be very helpful. Getting into the last section of today's video though, and the last topic I want to discuss is fighting practice. Fighting practice basically refers to any simulation of a fight within creative. The reason I recommend you supplement your regular gameplay with fighting practice is because you can jump in arena and get into like 10 or 20 fights per hour, but if you're grinding creative, you can easily get upwards of 60 or 70 or even more than that, making it a very good way to practice the most raw aspects of fighting within Fortnite. Obviously, it doesn't include some of the more intricate details of the game, like your game sense and whatnot, but I definitely find it really helpful for improving at pure fighting. I definitely recommend that you spend the bulk of your time in regular games, but doing some creative practice against skilled players is definitely a good way to supplement that. The main methods I recommend for fighting practice are going to be realistic 1v1s, zone wars, and realistic PvPs. Starting with realistic 1v1s, these are basically 1v1s that simulate a mid-game fight. They have realistic loot, a real opponent, and they're based in locations similar to those on the map. Zone wars are basically a simulation of a scrim endgame within creative, where you run into a ton of fights and you can adapt to fighting under pressure, which is of course a very helpful skill to have. Especially if you're trying your hand in competitive at some point, zone wars can also help you improve your endgame skills to some extent. And finally, you've got realistic PvPs, which are basically a map where up to 20 players all spawn in one map and brawl it out, and they respawn each time they die until someone reaches a certain amount of points. This is also a fantastic way to practice fighting under pressure, since people are constantly landing and fighting around you, and it's a very well-rounded form of practice since it uses real loot, real HP, and a variety of skill levels, obviously because it's mostly random opponents. With that said, I'll put 3 codes up on screen right now. One is to a realistic 1v1 map, one is to a 32-player zone war map, and the third one is to a realistic PvP map. So in your off time, when you're not practicing your aim, doing a mechanics map, or playing regular matches, these fighting maps are a fantastic way to practice and stay ahead of the game. But with all that said, guys, that's going to wrap it up for today's video on how to W key like a pro in Fortnite Chapter 4. Overall, by following all the tips I've discussed in this video, you should find yourself improving dramatically in terms of your mechanical skill and aim, and having a much more sound strategy to W key and win fights in Fortnite, whether you're playing arena, public matches, or whatever else. If you found this video helpful, then be sure to drop a like on it, and consider subscribing as well if you're new to the channel and want to see more content just like this in the future. And lastly, if you want to show some extra support, it would really mean a lot to me if you could use code Teckoh in the item shop. It's 100% free for you, it only takes a few seconds to type in, and it seriously does help me out a bunch. As always, a massive thank you to everyone who uses my code, you guys are awesome. But with that said, thank you all for watching today's video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.